I have a very funny claim of somebody who got out of their van in a rush to help a customer carrying their shopping in and didn't take the handbrake off and just watched it roll into the front of the house.
Oh, no.
And I felt really sorry for him because I was like, he was actually trying to do like the nice thing.
So I did a nice thing, yeah.
Like, oh no.
Welcome everybody to another Outside Crowd podcast, and tonight we will be talking about the very exciting subject of insurance, and we have a very special guest who I shall introduce in a second. But first of all, we've got with us from the crowd, we got Ryan.
How's it going?
And we haven't got Billy. And we haven't got Jake, unfortunately. I don't know what they're doing, but they couldn't make it tonight. But we're pleased tonight to have Sophie Elford with us, who's going to be talking about insurance and going through a few things there. So first of all, just hand over to Sophie. Tell us about yourself.
Thanks, JB. I've drawn the short straw, I think, on the exciting world of insurance. So my name's Sophie Elford, and I've got about 20 years insurance experience. I've worked in broking, claims handling, like legal defence of insurance claims. So I've got kind of a really broad range of experience. I've worked on all different products. So hopefully I'll be able to answer some of your burning questions tonight.
I think you will, because you've spoken many a time about insurance and regaled me with funny stories about things. So yeah, it should be fun. That's the main thing. But I think it's one of those topics where it's really important for small businesses, and especially landscaping companies, to have adequate insurance. But I suppose the first question, what is insurance and why do you need it?
Well, for a small business, JB, it's particularly important. And I think there's probably lots of small businesses out there that either don't have any cover or the right cover. And it depends, obviously we'll get into the detail later about what types of cover you can have. But it's really important to protect you and your employees. And also it can help you protect your income as well. So it's really essentially you're buying some risk. That's what you're doing, and someone else is going to take that risk on for you.
Right. Yeah, and I imagine it's an inherently risky business that they have. Landscapers are doing, tree surgeons as well. Billy's a tree surgeon, so I imagine, he needs to be.
Yeah, working at height.
Plenty of types of insurance as well, but not all of them are legally required, are they? So I suppose I was thinking what insurance do you actually need?
Yeah, so the only legal requirement you have is for employer's liability.
Right.
And that's in case either you or one of your employees get sick or injured at work. A lot of those will include your personal accident as well, so it includes injury to you. And the most important thing about that is that even if it's casual staff, then you're still required to have them insured. And even if they have their own insurance, then you are also required to carry a employer's liability for them.
So what exactly is employer's liability covering? So that's going to be everything for your, as an employer?
Yeah, anyone that you employ.
Yeah.
And whether they are casual work, so they could just be people that you get in every now and then to help out the day's labouring. They could be people that are self-employed, like professionals, but they're working for you and they might carry their own insurance. You must still have insurance for them.
You've still got to cover them for them.
I think the only exceptions in law are people that are direct family members who are working for you.
Right.
So like an immediate relative.
So what are the sort of things that you could claim against? So if an employee does something, is that like if he falls over or if he breaks?
So exactly. And it's all to do with obviously injury or accident at work. But what people don't realise is that the life of a claim like that can go on, for an unlimited amount of time. If somebody has a very serious accident and they have an injury that is going to impact them for the rest of their life, like they might not be able to work. If they've got young children, the claim will be, into the millions, because it will look at what their capacity to earn was, what their capacity to provide for their children would have been. And if they're saying they're never going to be able to work again, then the claim, it will, quite easily run into over £1 million.
And the claim, someone has a claim that doesn't actually, there's no limitation.
There'll be a limitation under the policy. So in law, the minimum requirement is 5 million, but most insurers will offer 10 as a standard.
Right. And in terms of timescale, before someone can make the claim, so say they have an accident and it something comes out.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm thinking some like people used to work down in the pits and they then get some asthma or bronchial problem, bronchitis or something. Would they have a claim later on, even if it's been a period of time before?
Within 3 years, generally, for a personal injury. But there's different requirements depending on their age. So if they're under the age of 21, then they've got until their 21st birthday to make a claim.
Right.
Because sometimes an injury might not be known until people develop or become aware.
Right. Yeah, that's it. Because it's the injury might not happen.
Yeah.
At that point in time, mightn't it? Right, okay.
And also, sorry, just say on that as well,
Yeah.
it's about the protection of it as well. So you can get people that, we all hear about the fake claims and that awful programme that's on in the morning on TV. I can't remember what it's called. But, it does also protect you against that as well. If you get somebody making a spurious claim, your insurers will investigate that. They're not going to want to hand over that money as much as you probably, wouldn't want to either. So, that they will also undertake all of that for you.
Right, okay, so it's acting as a bit of a defence for you as well.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. Yeah, their job is to defend claims. That's what insurers do.
Okay, so companies need employers' liability by law. The other one that usually always crops up, especially in sort of like combined policies, I think, is with small business, public liability.
Yeah. Absolutely.
What's that?
So public liability is for you or an employee, and again, it could be a casual member of staff, causes injury to a person or a property. So it could be that you've left some materials out and someone's tripped over them, or it could be that you've actually dropped some materials onto a patio and you've damaged it. So, it covers person and product as well. Right,
okay. So if you're working out on site, Ryan,
that's it, yeah.
You're bringing a load of materials through and then you go and bash someone's shed.
Yeah.
That would then be covered by
absolutely
the public liability insurance.
Or if you have, I have a very funny claim of somebody who got out of their van in a rush to help a customer carrying their shopping in and didn't take the handbrake off and just watched it roll into the front of the van.
Oh
no. And I felt really sorry for him because I was like, he was actually trying to do like the nice thing.
So I did a nice thing, yeah.
Oh no. Don't be helpful, let that be the lesson. Don't help old ladies in their shopping.
And make sure you put your handbrake on.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, God. Right. So, but public liability is not a legal requirement.
No, it's not. No.
Right. But it's funny, I suppose most, because
it would generally be offered as standard.
Yeah, as a sort of combined insurance, isn't it? Yeah.
And also, you'll find some of these things can sit in your home insurance policy as well. So under your content, you've got a public liability. And if you're doing things on a professional capacity, like your limited company, etc., it probably won't apply. But if you're out working for yourself, doing something, you may find that some home insurers will respond to that as well.
Oh, right, interesting.
Right.
Or if you've got like materials that you store at home and something could have, like rolled off your driveway or something and causes an injury, then there's also an option that you can do that. So you can claim under your home insurance. But the most important thing is that if you have insurance of some kind, then the legal team that are appointed will actually search all your other policies and they will see if there's anything else, because there's something called subrogation that insurers can do where they can pass that risk out to other people and share the claim.
Right, yeah, so they can try and pass it on to someone else to...
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's... Yeah, because that's the thing always sort of surprises me. Is there a big sort of insurance database
There is, yeah.
Are you giving away the dark secrets of insurance here?
Yeah, there is, yeah. There's something called the Q.
It's a club.
Yeah. It's called Q, which is CUE. It's the Claims and Underwriting Exchange, and it's a share of information. So it contains all information about all claims made or claims inquired about as well. So, and it contains information about value, if the claim was paid out or not, what type of claim it was and what peril it lived under.
Right. So with my cynical head, is that then just part of that used to check whether people's fill out their proposals correctly? We'll come on to proposals a bit later, but is that what they do? Will they use that information to see whether people have actually filled things out correctly?
So its primary purpose was to prevent fraud. So it's for those people that are making the cash for cash claims that you see on Motor. It began really to stop those sorts of things where you get people, taking the same car to multiple insurers, reporting the same type of damage over and over. You pick them up through that. But it's kind of much wider than that. And so yes, most insurers will check it when you take out the policy. They'll have a system that automatically checks the database. Some don't. Some will check it afterwards, or they'll rely on your honesty. But what will absolutely happen is if you make a claim, they will go back and check what you proposed.
Right. Then you're not covered.
Yeah, and that's why it's so important to be really. And if you're unsure, to make sure. And if you're unsure whether your insurer carried out that check when you took out the policy, then ring them up and ask them.
Right. We'll come back onto that because there's a few questions we'll ask about, filling out your proposals accurately and what you should do. Because I think so many people are pretty glib with how they fill them out. And I must admit, it scares the willies out of me nowadays because you're just thinking this. So I was probably talking to you. You're telling me about the stories of how people sort things out. And I'm like, I've got to fill it out correctly.
Campfire stories,
Right. So we've got the only other one I was just going to ask you, in saying things that are legally required by way of insurance. Car insurance is legally required, isn't it?
Yes, but you'll find that. I mean, that will be a separate.
It'd be a separate policy.
Wouldn't it? But you must have
You've got to have a
trade. Motor trade. Yeah, you must be insured for your business purposes. Yeah,
that's it.
Right. Okay. So they're the essentials. The one that always partly prompted the idea for this podcast was the fact that professional indemnity insurance.
Yep.
Because I'm never sure whether a lot of sort of small businesses and landscapers, decking installers, all those types of people realise whether or have got it, or whether they realise they should have it. So what is it?
Yeah.
And who needs it?
So it's always sold as an add-on. You'll find some insurers sell like packages for particular trades, like building trade, and within that package you'll probably find it. You might also find contracts works insurance in there as well, and that's if your contract gets disrupted by fire or flood, they would pay for the loss of time on site and materials, etc. But your professional indemnity is to cover you for any failures which result in harm or loss, financial loss to your customer. And that really is for people that, in this scenario, landscaping would be for anyone that's designing. So if you design something and it fails, or the customer believes it has failed, they could initiate a claim from that point. So if you've done some decking and actually a year later it started to collapse and it's become unsafe, and you designed it and built that structure, they could come to you to make a claim. So if you didn't have professional indemnity insurance, they could actually then begin legal proceedings against you. And if you have a property or something like that, they'll secure it against your home.
Right.
Wow.
Because then if something's gone wrong on the basis of, say, negligent design, then none of your other policies are going to cover you.
No, you need professional indemnity for that.
So it won't be because I remember with construction, it was always a case of, is it negligent design where an architect was responsible for it? Mm-hmm. So the contractor would be saying, we did what we were told, the design was rubbish, and the architect will be going, no, the design's fine, it was just the workmanship was rubbish. Yeah. But if you're a landscaper and you've been asked to put something, a patio in, you are effectively designing and installing it, aren't
you? And if you work with other people to help you, or you seek advice, you need to check that they also have that insurance. Because if your design is dependent on their guidance, then obviously if there's a failure in it, you need to make sure that they've also got that in place. And you'll find that most home insurers, you have to notify them of any sort of work taking place, and they'll be asking about your contractors. If you say, I've got a landscape gardener coming in and we're building a large section of decking, we're doing this and that, they will want to check all their insurances to make sure they're in place. And if they're not, then they won't offer you cover anymore, because it's such a risk for insurers to have somebody who's, the worst thing for an insurer is somebody who's kind of doing it themselves at home. That they don't like that. Makes them very nervous.
Yeah, that makes me nervous as well.
Yeah.
And me.
And me. I had enough trouble painting my door at the weekend.
Call yourself a surveyor.
That always... I suppose one question I've got down here then is, if you're a landscaper or someone, the question comes down, what is design?
Yeah.
So literally, would that come down to, if you're someone... if you're making a choice about how something is put together, so if you're choosing the type of fixings, that essentially is design.
Yeah.
Anything like that.
Yeah. I would say anything that's designed. And also what you have to remember, I guess, with landscape gardening, thinking about it, is that, we see issues in properties that are flooded because somebody has changed the landscaping around it, and it's diverted water in a different way, or they've put a different type of planting in a different place or stuff like that. So that it's kind of, the possibilities are endless, and sometimes they're just things that you just would never have foreseen that could happen. But if that's your design, you've redesigned that garden, and now as a result the customer is suffering,
right,
then there's a right there to make a claim.
Yes, because I always just think a lot of people don't realise that.
Yeah.
No,
even though the way that the direction that farmers plough a field is also regulated.
Really?
Because if you have fields that are near homes and you plough them in a certain way, you cause runoff in a certain direction, and then it causes flooding. And as an insurer, we would go and recover the money from that farmer.
Crikey. So farmers have to work out what's the best way to... So they wouldn't actually be doing it based on what's the best for their crops.
Regulation guidance on how, on what
Bloody
they should
hell.
be doing it.
So what's the situation then? Because you're doing work with, well, potentially with some designers nowadays. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So if you actually got a garden designer in, and the designer gives you plans to work to, would Ryan still need professional indemnity?
If he's not responsible, anyway. just double check, just saying people. No, because he's not the designer, isn't he? He's not. So I think, I don't know about in landscaping, but like in construction, you've got the CDM about who's your principal designer and contractor. So I imagine it's a similar arrangement. So you're following a design that has been set out for you. So in that scenario, you'd be principal contractor, wouldn't you?
Right. Yeah.
So you need to make sure that your designers have got that, because ultimately, I think the only time that you could potentially become culpable for that is if there was something that was so glaringly obvious in the design, and you still, you have the capacity and the ability to identify that it was wrong, but yet you still did it.
Yeah.
I don't know, supporting an entire decking on like a 2 metre, plywood or something. We all know that's not going to end well. Something like that, then you'd absolutely be culpable. And I guess if you didn't follow that design to the letter, or there was a problem, you've come to execute it and actually it's not possible, and you've kind of done a workaround.
Yeah.
There's scenarios where you've now taken responsibility again because you've kind of put your own idea in.
Yeah, because that's the usual bit, isn't it? Because you'll get like design, especially going back to architects and their design, they're usually so bloody woolly. Mm-hmm. The contractor on site has to make it work. So effectively, he's completing the design. So there could be a liability there if you're taking on an aspect of the design and
and that's the thin line, really, isn't it? What do you judge as something that you need to get over? Is it, but everything for us is always with landscape. Will it move? No, so that's goes to the basis of that. That's what we do. So
and also you've got to be practical on site, haven't you? You can't keep ringing up the designer every 5 minutes going, I've gone to lay this slab and it's not quite 2 centimetres. Exactly. FaceTiming them. It could be a slow process.
But it does become important, doesn't it? Because ultimately, I suppose, if there is a claim or something goes wrong,
and that's why I'd recommend that you always have your own professional indemnity. It's about I think what people don't realise is that when you make a claim under insurance, it's not as simple as you're making a claim, because to make a claim you're effectively suing someone. And that's what you're doing, and that's why all insurers are backed by a law firm, or will have a law firm they work with, or like us, we've built our own law firm in house because that's the best solution for us. So we give our work to them, but ultimately, if someone suffered a loss, you need to, you have to issue proceedings. That's the route that it goes down. And this whole thing of trying to work out a claim settlement is kind of an informal process before it gets there. But actually, a large chunk of claims will go through that litigation process.
Yes. Yeah. No, I was certainly involved with that with the NBM. You'd have and just trying to work out what the value of the numbers are on certain claims is a very complicated process.
It's quite subjective, and and it's not just about the damage it's caused; it's about then obviously correcting it and preventing it from happening in the future. And like the biggest thing we see, and we see it a lot in landscape gardening, and the damage it causes is unreal, because by the time it's discovered, it's huge. Is people fitting a patio and going above the DPM, then they've breached the DPM, and that is just. We see that all the time.
Are you kidding me?
It happens all the time.
Are you kidding me?
And the trouble is, it takes ages for it to... And if they've had it done just before summer, they might not see the effects of it until a following year. And the trouble is, by then, if they've got, if they've had insulation put into the walls,
it's just absolutely ruined.
Then that's all soaked it up. It can take a long time for it to become
absolutely ruined.
So take us through it. So in that scenario, then, so that's happened. The homeowner's going, this is all
damp,
buggered up,
very soggy. I've got mushrooms growing behind the curtains. Cultivating my own mushrooms inside.
Well,
good news is I'll never be short of mushrooms.
Yeah, that's it. You've got plenty for breakfast. So when that happens, if the contractor or the person who installed it hasn't got any insurance, they're just going to be personally liable.
Yes, and we would, as an insurer, so we'd have to identify them. We'd have to be able to prove, obviously, that it was them. So it needs to be in our customer's tenure. If they, bought that house a couple of years ago and it wasn't evident, because what you'll find in a lot of things is, people might see a bit of damp, they'll paint over it, or it can be some years before the severity of that problem could be realised. And if you have a particularly dry winter, it might be an issue. If they always have the heating on in that room, lots of factors that will influence it.
By the time you notice it, right in the top corner,
sometimes it could be a change of ownership. It could be anything that triggers it. But generally speaking, if it's a really bad breach, you'll see it quite quickly, because actually you'll find, if it's really heavy rainfall, you'll see the water ingressing quite quickly. But as an insurer, we would then identify who did that. We'd then try to find, if they've got insurance, and if they haven't, then we would pursue them for the money. And it's not a case of, if they said I couldn't afford it, we would put a charge against their property. That's
well, I was going to. The question that came up to me then is, does the fact that they were working under a limited company give them any protection?
I'm not entirely sure about that, actually. I'd have to check that.
Yeah.
I don't...
Whether you'd be suing the limited company rather than them as individuals. But in a lot of cases, I don't...
You wouldn't... you'd be very unlikely to find that in that scenario, because they'd generally be a much bigger operation, wouldn't they, in that scenario? So these are really kind of your one-man band.
Yeah.
Small enterprises.
Yes, I mean...
With a few casual labourers or, a couple of employed
staff.
Staff.
Because I imagine with some, even with a lot of sort of smaller companies, they probably haven't got much in the way of assets and things. But then
it's a DPC. Just put it below it. I'm sorry. I'm sitting there going, what?
That little black line.
That's all it.
Like 3 or 4 bricks
150 mil below that, if not an echo channel up to it. 100 mil clearance. Guys, teams, just.
Yeah,
where does the water go? Have you seen how wet it is?
Bricks and stuff,
the big
don't cover them up, please.
No, who does that?
Don't fill them in.
No.
You sound like you know what you're talking about, Ryan.
He feels like he doesn't need professional damaging.
I'm sweating there thinking about it. I can't believe it. It's just, it's just for me that is very, very simple practice. That's not. We're not talking about skill level here. We're not talking about what you can do on the property. We're just talking about the very simple thing. The first thing we think about as landscapers, if you ask the team that go in, the young team that we have, even them guys, even today we were talking about levels, and we're at MOT level, so we're a bit low, and we're building up the area, and one of the younger lads turns around and goes, two below damp, we've got this much to bring up. And I'm like, how do you know that? So because we know we need to go 2 below damp. And it's like, well, that's it. It's 150 millimetres. That's it. We're not going level threshold. If we are, up to that DPC, then we do an echo channel all around. The first thing we think about, we are outside. Where does the water go?
And as we're, climate change, we're moving into wetter winters and summers. So
wetter winters. You're telling me? Have you?
It's pretty soggy.
What is going on?
Yeah, hardly worked this year.
Yeah, exactly. Can't do that. I'll melt.
Right. So how much? Professional indemnity, is it expensive? And especially if you're starting out and you haven't got a trading history or anything, or does that make any difference?
So I think it depends. All insurers rate things very differently. They all have a very different appetite for risk, which is why you'll find different prices at different insurers. So some insurers are really risk averse, and they won't want people that are in their first couple of years of trading. They'll expect a minimum number of years trading. The most important thing really is your claims history, because that tells you everything that the insurer needs to know about you and about how risky you are.
Risky you are. Whether you know what DPM is.
Yeah, exactly. If you've already got 20 claims for a failure to lay a patio below DPM, then you're not going to be a very good risk for them.
Right.
And you'll find that if you're obviously we'll get onto it on the application questions, but what insurers class as a moral hazard as well. They'll be asking questions about you as a person, as an individual, that you need to make sure you're kind of answering correctly.
Oh, I'll have to write that down so I don't forget that.
You are a moral hazard, yeah.
Oh, so you are a moral hazard.
I don't know. I haven't answered the question.
There's a definition, is there, of a moral hazard?
Not always. So I say, like, you know, all insurers have a very different appetite for different types of risk.
Yes.
And they'll, you know, their risk model is you know, very unique to them. So you'll find some will be more open to risk because they might have more data that allow them to price it. So, for example, a good example of that in home is like subsidence in London. Lots of insurers won't insure in London because subsidence is really problematic because it's on clay, and also access is really difficult. So when you do have to underpin, or not that anyone really underpins anymore, but when you do have to do works, it's really tricky. It just costs much more because you can't get all the equipment that you need to get there. You can't park easily. Contractors, you know, can't ship in and out easily. And so lots of insurers won't rate in London, but some will, and that's just because they're probably a bit more established. They've got a lot more data, so they can pick out the better risks.
Right. I was going to say, someone must have to provide insurance.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And there's companies that insurers buy that data from. So we work with several companies where we buy data that looks at, you know, and you buy data about different things. Could be like theft risk, and it'll be the same in you know, small, medium business insurance. They'll be looking at different types of risks. So
they're buying all this data. Crikey, all this stuff goes on behind the scenes, isn't it? Which we're not aware of.
Yeah. I don't think they're buying any data about you, Jamie.
Don't you?
No, I don't sure there's any.
We are very important, to be honest with you.
I hope they haven't got the holiday pictures on there. Or the old party pictures.
The old holiday snaps. Well, no, you're right.
So basically then, we're summing up with PI.
Yeah.
If you're doing any sort of design work, or anything that would categorise or be classified rather as design, you have got to have
and
it.
Don't think about design as just being construction of something. It's, you know, like we talked about design of a garden. If you're changing the height of soil, or you know, you're putting banking in, anything at all, where you've substantially altered something, then that's you know, that's a real problem.
And it would also apply to negligent advice as well, wouldn't it? So if you put something in writing, because I remember this was always say like an MBM or professional indemnity, even though we never ever had a claim, which is ridiculously expensive, but it always covered. Yeah. Basically, if we're doing reports and someone thought we did them.
Absolutely. In some ways, reports are actually it can be more expensive and that sort of stuff, because it can be, you know, firstly you've committed it in writing, so it's kind of easier to prove. You know, there are claims that are harder to kind of wriggle out of, and things can be quite subjective. You know, if for example, we've seen claims where people have, you know, laid so much patio that actually, and they've removed so much of the soil from the garden that actually there's no kind of ability to absorb or drain away when, you know, when they do get heavy rainfall, and if you're on a hill or something like that, you know, it's problematic. And actually, they, you know, those sorts of things, there's some where they're obviously really obvious a failure of the contractor, but there's some where it's like, well, actually the customer could have made some changes since as well.
Yeah.
They could have taken out some planting they didn't like, and actually what you'd put in was there deliberately to you know, to absorb runoff. Or,
I see.
So you know, it's not they're not as easy to kind of.
Yes.
So I guess from an insurance point of view, being cynical, they're probably easier to wriggle out of, as people say. Defend, we like to say. But you know, there's options to defend it. They're, you know, they're not
right.
Yeah,
yes.
There's more investigation that can happen.
Yeah. Okay.
Whereas, you know, when you've put something in writing, JB.
Yes.
We've all seen it.
You've seen it. Yeah, that's there, isn't it? Crikey, yeah. I know that, the amount of weasel words, and that was always a phrase I gave to you, Ryan, wasn't it? Weasel words, get the weasel words in there. But sometimes you have to have those sort of...
protect yourself.
Protect yourself, you know, against
certain
and
you're
things.
absolutely right. If you give advice, you know, maybe you're someone you've done some work for before, but actually they just ask you some advice about, you know, stuff they want to do in their small front garden or something they're not actually going to employ you to do, and you've, you know, sent them an email saying, oh, do this or that or whatever. You just got to be really careful.
Yeah, because you can still be liable there, can't you?
Absolutely, yeah, and that's why it's really important to have it.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, no, it's an
eye opener, really, isn't it?
Yeah,
it is
and it's generally people just trying to be helpful and nice, and it's about, you know, you want to keep that client relationship, don't you? You want them to recommend you to other people. You want them to think you're helpful.
Yeah,
knowledgeable. You know.
Yeah, exactly.
Is that a test? Is that a,
exactly.
Yeah, I get that.
Right then. So, landscapers, check your PI. So whether you need it, you probably do, and if you haven't got it, then apart from give Sophie a call, then.
But even, you know, just like regular gardeners should also look at having it, because if you have a customer where you put lots of new planting in for them, or, you know, we have a gardener, so, you know, we'll say that flower bed looks a bit, we'll actually leave it to you. You're an expert. We don't know the first thing about plants, and, you know, everything I plant seems to die. So,
crikey.
You could find yourself in a scenario where you've done something that could impact that. And I think that, so as we move more into kind of climate change and much more rain, that's where if you're doing anything outside base, you should be thinking about that.
If you're choosing the choice of plants, then I suppose it goes back to similar to your farmer's example, isn't it? If the choice of plants then effectively becomes a design issue.
Yeah, exactly.
Crikey. I was thinking about when we had the guy.
I think if you change one plant, obviously it's not going to be like, can't put that in. Sorry, I haven't got the PI for it.
Dear, oh dear. Okay then, so yeah, that's bloody important.
Very important.
What about them filling out your proposals? Because I had 2 questions down here. What happens if you... Because a lot of people think, it's just insurance, let's just scribble anything down, they won't look at it. It's really boring as well. Yeah, what if you deliberately falsify information?
So there's an Insurance Act, the name which completely escapes me, obviously. And it actually came in fairly recently, a couple of years ago, and it gives really clear guidance to insurers on how they can treat that scenario. So there's what they call a reckless non-disclosure. And then, so that's something where you absolutely knew it wasn't the right answer, but you gave that answer because you knew it was going to get you the best outcome, i.e. the cheapest premium. So if you've got 5 PI claims that you need to disclose, but actually you've only disclosed 1 because with 5 your premium is going to be really expensive. That's a reckless non-disclosure. And in that scenario, you would find that if you then came to make a claim, then your insurer will be able to void your policy, what they call ab initio, so they take it back to the beginning. So it's like the policy never existed, and it will either go back to your renewal, or it'll go back from the very first day you incepted. So if you've been on cover with that same company for 3 years, they could take it, and that's when the misrep happened. They'll take it all the way back to the 3 years.
Right.
And that means that for that whole 3 year period, you haven't had any cover, which you might think, oh, actually, it's not so bad. But when you think about personal injury claims, or design claims might not come out until a couple of years later because the failure of that design might not be evident then. You could actually still find yourself liable, and it's another thing to think about is if you move away from that industry or you retire, you might want to keep some PI claim insurance in place to see you through.
Is that sort of like a run-off cover?
Yeah, exactly. Because those things can take time to.
Because I remember one of the things I always remember, the Latin phrase stuck in my head: uber eremai fidei, something like that. Because insurance contracts are of the utmost good faith, aren't they?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you've got to be totally scrupulously honest, haven't you, about everything?
And if you're not sure, you need to go and ask as well. So you can have what's called an innocent misrep, where somebody they didn't understand that information wasn't quite correct, but they would have had an opportunity to validate it. So. I don't know, asked you about CCJs, and there might be 2 of you named on the policy because the company's joint names, something like that, and you don't ask your company partner if they have any CCJs against them. And because you didn't go away and find that out, you just assume they didn't because you think, I'll probably know about it if they did. And actually it turns out that they did have a CCJ, then you'd find that your policy is invalid. And that's the same on any policy, whether it's motorhome, whatever. If you have, and also read the questions really carefully. All insurers will ask the questions slightly differently, and it's not people trying to catch you out. It goes back to their kind of appetite for risk. Some will ask about just you. Some will ask about you or people in your company. If in household, they might ask about you or people in your household because they're just trying to understand the risk against their own criteria. And their questions are written differently to help them attract the right risk.
Yes, because I must admit, I don't know, it's just getting older. I always just find they're just quite, not scary, but you just realise what the implications are of if you don't get it right.
And I think a lot of people feel like there's things asked that are not relevant, like the CCJ question. So they'll ask about any voluntary agreements you might have reached with creditors, bankruptcies or CCJs. And they're what's known as the moral hazard that we talked about.
Right.
There's some other questions as well that insurers might ask, but generally you'll find it's around finances. And insurers are asking those because they're trying to determine whether your lifestyle and your risk is, what you tend to find is that people who are in financial distress are going to be more prone to making a fraudulent claim. Or more prone in small business insurance. You might find they're more prone to cutting corners, or because they're trying to churn work out quickly to get the money back in. So they're just a bit riskier, unfortunately.
So if someone makes an innocent sort of representation or misrepresentation on their form, on their proposal, is that going to immediately void their policy, or do the insurance companies take a more measured approach to it?
It depends on what their response would have been if you'd given them the right answer. So under the Act, it says that you must treat it as if you had that information, what would you have done? And if the insurer says, I'd never have offered you cover, my criteria says that's not a risk I'd have taken, then they will void the policy.
Really?
If they say, actually, we'd have charged you more premium, they'll charge you the more premium. Or they could pay your claim out proportionality. So they'll say, we would have charged you 50% more premium, so we're only going to pay 50% of your claim.
Right.
So that's why it's really important to, and if you're unsure and you're doing it online, just ring up and ask. They'll have teams of people there.
But that's the hardest, because there's some insurance companies are purely online, aren't they? And trying to get through to anybody, they don't.
No, they should always have a sales team. Yeah, because under the FCA, you have certain requirements to not put in barriers to sale or advice.
Right.
Yeah. So you might find, generally when you buy something online, like from a really big insurer, it's what's called a non-advised sale. So they can't give you advice about your company and whether you need, should have a particular type of level of cover or type of cover. What they'll do is they'll ask you questions and you'll say, this is my turnover, whatever. And they'll say, well, this is the bracket we're kind of into.
Yeah.
This is kind of the minimum you need, this is your maximum. And actually, they'll ask you to kind of choose which one you want. So they'll give you kind of a steer. If you want a proper advised sale, which I'd think if you've never had insurance before, or if you're not sure if you've got the right insurance, then I would absolutely urge you to do that through a broker. Because a broker will give you all the advice, and it is an advice sale. And then if there is a problem later on down the line, it will be the broker's PI insurance. See what we did there? Seems think. It would be their PI insurance that was going to respond to that, and the broker would be liable for that. So as long as obviously you haven't lied to your broker. So if you said, no, I haven't got any CCJs, no previous claims, I'm an absolute dream of a risk, right. Take me on. I would always say for your first year or two, go with a broker. And people always think brokers are much more expensive, and that they're not. They're really not.
Yeah, I didn't find that when I was doing it. The only thing about Simply Business that we use, I remember speaking at the beginning of it, thinking, right, I need all of these insurances, this is what I need to do. And I remember I was on a digger and I had loudspeaker, and I thought, right, this is the time I can do this. It's the only time I can speak to my insurance, get this sorted, change the policy. Because I'm done working.
An accident on his digger. You show the irony of it.
Changing my insurance, but I spoke when they, it was speaking to somebody, and I remember thinking to myself, thank goodness, because it was a conversation. She just said it, as plain as I needed it. Let me put it that way. I needed it spelt out what I needed when I need it. And we went through the whole thing, and I walked away from it going, yep, I've got policy. I haven't got the standard policy. We got one up because that's what I feel we needed. It was, and it was. I got it spelt out to me. That was really helpful, and that was for a broker. So it was, they were just really helpful.
What happens if you don't know the answer to a question? Because there was something I came up on. I think it's to do with my caravan policy, and they're saying, has he got anchors holding it down and all this sort of stuff? And I thought, if you just bought it or something you didn't know,
you typed in boat. Didn't you?
Boat. They're anxious on
hang on.
They're saying all this stuff, it could be washed away, I think.
There you go. You should use the internet on your own.
Yeah, that's it, yeah.
I'm dangerous. But the thing is, there's something you generally don't know, or you just expected, you've got to go and find out and just put the best answer down yourself.
Yeah, you should go and find out. You should absolutely go and find out.
It's such a pain.
Well, but the thing is, rightly so, you've got to get it done. You have to, because otherwise
the insurers are, trying to establish the risk, and that's why if you went through a different insurer, they might not even ask you that question because they might not care. But generally, you'll find that the ones that ask less questions are going to be more expensive because they can't be as accurate about it.
Okie dokie. Right, we're getting towards the end of our time, but I suppose the final question then is, what bit of advice would you give to small companies, landscapers, regarding insurance?
Yeah, it would be get advice. That would be my number one, is make sure you absolutely get advice. And actually, you talked about Simply Business. They're probably one of the best in the industry. They're a broker. They're fantastic. I work with lots of people who used to work there at quite a high level, and they've got a great reputation, and they offer a really broad range of products. Or in your first couple of years, if you're really unsure, absolutely go and see a local broker, because you'll get a bit more of a personal service if you're really new to it.
And you said there's one in Tunbridge.
There's one in Tunbridge. Yeah, there's a landscaping gardener brokers in Tunbridge, just off the high street, I think it is.
Right.
But if you Google it, I think they are called landscape brokers, or it was something quite, Do
you still have ones where you can actually go in the shop there and sit with them and then run through the forms with them?
I think they are. I don't know. I've only come across them online, but I think they have got a shop. Yeah.
Right.
And actually, it's making a comeback, having a physical place, because I think there are so many kind of, risks and things coming up now that people are kind of feeling a bit unsure about.
Well, definitely with all the changes as well. We've got lots of changes coming in the pipeline of everything, all codes changing and being implemented, and so definitely.
I would definitely do that. And answer the form really honestly.
Answer the form honestly,
There's some of the worst claims I dealt with where, people, they just didn't realise the impact of not answering that question.
Yes.
And generally it's always the ones around moral hazard, because people don't see that they're relevant to their policy. They're like, what's that got to do with you?
As long as they're not lying, they're lying on their Tinder profile, you'll find.
I mean, it's not true. Devastated. JP told me he was like 6'4" and long hair and buff body. But I see what you mean.
I'm certainly not lying. I must admit, insurance is a pretty dry subject, but it's always good fun talking to Sophie about it. So it's buttering her up. But thank you very much, Sophie, for your expertise on this one. It's been
thanks, Huey.
We enjoyed it. And,
no problem at all.
So we'll probably have you back when we actually got a few claims come in. We can have our special claims line. Ask Sophie.
Like comedy series. Claims.
No, brilliant. Thank you very much for your time. It is appreciated. And thank you to Ryan for sitting through.
Cheers, guys. I'll see you soon.
And getting worried. And all you people out there, make sure you got your insurances in check. And we look forward to bringing another Outside Crowd podcast to you next week. Cheers.